Hi, my name is Rachel Brooks, and today I'll be presenting on the mineral iron. Iron is a trace mineral, and we know a lot about this mineral in comparison to many of the other vitamins and minerals in our body, which I think is pretty awesome. It's naturally present in many of the foods that we consume. And when I say iron is a trace mineral, that means that it's needed in consumptions between 1 and 100 milligrams per day, which is a much smaller amount than the other minerals. And even though it only needs to be consumed in these relatively small amounts, its presence in the body is still very vital. Iron is instrumental in oxygen transport and growth and development, among many other important functions, and we will talk about all of those in a little bit. Iron takes on two forms, heme iron and non-heme iron. Heme iron is found primarily in animal products, and non-heme iron is found primarily in plant foods. So here we have the recommended dietary allowances for iron. And if you look at this table, you can see that it's kind of all over the place. When you're younger, you need a little bit more even than a male does, who's in his um, youth years, and then you need about the same amount as, I guess you need even more than you need in iron for a male who's between 19 and 50 years old. And if you're a woman, you need a lot more iron, and this is due to menstruation. We lose a lot of blood during menstruation, and so we need to replace all that iron that's lost. And pregnancy is also another really important time when you need a lot of iron. So you can see that that dietary allowance is set at 27 milligrams per day. And here is a list of the upper intake levels. And these are all pretty close together. You can see that it's between 40 and 45 milligrams for everyone. So you got to be really careful if you're supplementing. You need to be really careful about not going above these upper level intakes. And we'll talk more I'll talk a little bit more about toxicity if you do go over these amounts. Functions. So the major function of iron is oxygen transport. And we'll get into this in the next slide. It's also needed in energy metabolism. Iron is a cofactor involved in neurotransmitter synthesis. This process is very important in children who are building their brains, because without iron, their cognitive abilities and lifelong brain function can be seriously compromised, and that might be irreversible. And the last function that I'm just going to touch on right here is iron's role in infection prevention. Iron is used to build lymphocytes and killer cells, which aid in infection prevention. Iron's role in hemoglobin. Iron is an essential component in the protein hemoglobin, which is found in the red blood cells. And within each hemoglobin protein, there are 4 heme iron molecules. And the hemoglobin is responsible for carrying oxygen to all the body tissues. It also carries carbon dioxide to the lungs to be expired. When iron is not present within hemoglobin, the kidneys send a hormonal message that tells the body that it needs to produce more blood. So in turn, the kidneys, the body then creates more blood, and this actually causes an increased need for iron. So this is one reason why it's very important to obtain enough iron in your diet. Myoglobin is another protein, and this is found within the muscle cells. It's very similar to hemoglobin in that each myoglobin protein contains 1 iron molecule, that is responsible to take oxygen from the bloodstream and drop it off to skeletal and heart muscles. This is why when a person is deficient in iron, they can feel really weak and short of breath, especially when they're doing some sort of physical activity or work. So in metabolism, iron plays a very key role. Within the mitochondria, iron is needed to carry electrons from NADH plus and FADH2 to oxygen molecules within the electron transport chain. It's also needed in the first step of the citric acid cycle to convert citrate into other compounds. And I guess you can tell that this is why iron is also important. Another key reason why we need to have enough iron, because our body can't create ATP in this electron transport chain or the citric acid cycle if it doesn't have the iron to do so. Next, we have food sources. We already touched a little bit on heme iron and non-heme iron. So the heme iron has a list here of different animal products that provide a good source of iron. And then the non-heme iron are non-animal sources of plant sources that provide a good amount of iron. So the difference here is that heme iron is a lot more bioavailable to the body, so meaning the body can use it a lot easier than non-heme iron. Iron deficiency anemia. This is the most common nutrient deficiency in the United States. Iron deficiency can be very dangerous, especially among the young children, because, like I mentioned earlier, it can cause irreversible delays and cognitive impairment, and it could even cause death if it's serious enough. The symptoms that you're going to feel if you're deficient in iron would be tiredness, physical performance is going to be way down, your oxygen is not being transferred to the muscles and other tissues in the body, so this is why you're just going to feel really bogged down and tired. Other symptoms that you might experience are being more prone to infections and delays in growth and development and cognitive impairment. And those who are at a higher risk for iron deficiency anemia are children. Teenage girls are also high risk. Women in childbearing years are at high risk, and those who frequently donate blood are also at risk for developing an iron deficiency anemia. And one of the things that I think is really kind of a phenomenon is that women during childbearing years, iron is a very key nutrient to have in their diet, and yet if you're a woman or if you know people who've been pregnant before, that's a really hard time in your life to eat food, I guess. With my first pregnancy, I lost 10 pounds in my first trimester because I could not eat anything or I would throw everything up. And obviously I was not getting enough iron in my diet, so I find that very interesting. And that's one of the first questions I'm going to ask Heavenly Father about when I get to heaven, because I'm very curious about why it's so challenging to get enough iron in your diet, especially when you're pregnant, when it's very, very important to have enough iron in your diet. So let's move on to iron toxicity, which is not very fun at all either. Accidental iron overdose is the #1 cause of poisoning in children under 6. And the symptoms that you'll experience if you have iron toxicity will be things like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, stomach irritation, and impaired absorption of other minerals. So, like I mentioned, I'm currently pregnant myself, and I went from being deficient in iron recently to being toxic in iron, and I'm still trying to decide which of the two is worse. They're both not fun, but with the help of my doctor, I think I'm struck a balance here and I'm doing pretty well. But both iron deficiency anemia and iron toxicity are things that we need to be really careful to avoid. So there were a few interesting things that I ran into when I was studying about iron that I wanted to share today. Up to 60% of colon cancer patients are deficient in iron. Approximately 60% of patients with heart failure are deficient in iron. And people with gastrointestinal disorders are at higher risk for iron deficiency. So the colon cancer patients are likely to be deficient in iron due to chronic blood loss in bowel movements. Potential causes of iron deficiency in people with heart failure include poor nutrition, malabsorption, defective mobilization of iron stores, the use of aspirin and anticoagulants, which might result in the loss of some blood loss in the gastrointestinal tract, and in gastrointestinal orders, things like celiac disease or Crohn's disease might be caused by diet restrictions or malabsorption issues. And I find this very interesting because people with these chronic issues are probably not thinking much about what their iron levels are at. They're probably thinking a lot more about their pain and things going on with their body, which so how iron is vital during these times though, and it can help them avoid infections and other illness and fatigue as much as possible. So it's important for even these patients to receive the proper amount of diet that they need. Excuse me, the proper amounts of iron that they need. So I read an article that was called "Should You Take Iron Supplements to Fight Fatigue?" This article was just posted the question, "I'm feeling tired all the time. Should I take iron supplements to see if that makes me feel better?" And the suggested answer from this article was not without seeing your doctor first. And it also talks about the reasons why you need to see a doctor first. And this is because fatigue and some of the other symptoms you see when you are deficient in iron can also be caused by many other things other than iron deficiency. So it's important to learn first to see a doctor and to learn if you are actually deficient in iron or if you have a completely different problem. And you want to avoid toxicity. If you start taking your own iron supplement and you don't know how much you're getting or what you're doing really, then iron toxicity can happen really easily for a lot of people. So that you need to be careful of that. And your doctor will be able to help you find out why your iron is low, and if your iron is low, and can help you get that to the needed levels. If so, and if you have a completely different problem, then it's going to be a good thing that you went to the doctor to discover what that problem is. In conclusion, I have written here that iron is your friend. You really want to get enough iron in your diet to avoid all the problems that come with being deficient in iron. And trust me when I say being deficient in iron is not a fun thing at all. So you really want to maybe track your diet and find out if you're getting enough iron in your diet. And if you feel like you are, then that's great, and you don't need to supplement. And if you do feel like you need some more iron in your diet, it might be a good idea to go talk to your doctor and see what they think. Also, if you have children and you notice that they are kind of go through a point where they're looking really tired or laying down more often and not wanting to play as often as they do, it might be a good idea to have them see their doctor also, so that the doctor can assess whether or not they need some more iron in their diet. And that's my presentation today. Here are my references. Thanks for listening, everyone.